Alright, hello everyone. My name is Disc, and in this video we're looking at an 18 Court of Stars. And for this week's cycle we have Fortified, Spiteful, and Grievous. I had this idea going into Dragonflight that I'd open all my videos with a little aside talking about like whatever I felt like talking about, just little tips and tricks, or maybe reasons why I do something. Or like in this video, I wanted to kind of dive into my UI a little bit. After my last video with Algothar's Academy, there was a really good response to it, and pretty much everyone wanted me to talk a little bit about my UI, share my profiles, so that's what I'm going to do. So I am going to share all my profiles in the description, everything that I can share. And I wanted to take a minute to kind of talk about my decisions with these add-ons and explain my process to you. So first off, I think the most powerful thing you can do for a UI is keep it clean. Anywhere and everywhere you can, take things off your screen that don't impact your gameplay. So like with bigwigs, I don't really have cast names splash. I might use their audible, or I might have a timer if necessary, but I don't want that text splashing on my screen. It becomes clutter at the end of the day. Or like with OmniCD, I don't have 10 plus spells per spec that I'm tracking. There's no argument in the world that'll make me believe or think that that's going to benefit me in some way. So like with OmniCD, I just track one spell, and that's where I pair my PI, things like that. But first I want to talk about KUI nameplates. For nameplates, I don't believe you need to see a value, like a numeric value. I don't believe you need to see a level. I think all you really need is a health percentage, maybe a color shift when in execute range, and that's it. But with KUI nameplates, I do think it's the best on the market right now. I think a lot of people swear by Plater, and I think that's just because it's all they know. Or maybe that's like what popular streamers use, but I actually think it's the worst on the market right now, and I will never use it. And compared to KUI, it's just not good. But anyway, with KUI, I have this whole system here. Kind of revolves around this one feature where it says disable fade of tracked enemies. So every dungeon has about 5 or 6 standout strong mobs, which I've typed in here, and this is something I can share. But basically what this does is all of these stronger mobs won't fade, so they're going to be full opacity, where lesser mobs will be half opacity. And basically what we're doing here is setting up a system to help us put Schism in the best place. If you have a far weaker mob that's of no threat with a very small health pool, that's not a good Schism target because they might die and you might lose value on Schism. And also in large pools, it's really easy just to get lost in the thick of it. With so many nameplates on the screen, if you just throw out Schism randomly, that's not maximizing it, and this is a really easy system to help you navigate pools and put Schism on the best targets. I do have a couple of these you'll see that are gray instead of a standard red. Some pools, yeah, I just want someone to stand out as gray just to be like my very specific Schism target. For this week with Spiteful, for example, I have this stand out as purple. So it's really easy to track where they are in the field in relation to you and stay away from them. My Ancient Branch for Algothar's Academy, I keep him green. Things like explosives, I'll have them stark white with a glow border. So I just think putting a little bit of a system and a little bit of effort into your nameplates goes a long way to being able to read a field and maximize a play and maximize your spells. So anyway, that's KUI nameplates. And then I want to talk about Grid2. This is a powerhouse for discipline. I don't think native UI is good enough. I don't think Voodoo is good enough. and mainly I'm talking about tracking absorb values. As a priest, I do play shield spec, so just if you don't play shield spec, I still think this is the right play. But our biggest spell in our book is Rapture. We also have Wheel and Woe to give, really nice thick single shields. But what this does is it puts all your shield values growing from the left, and if you stack your party vertically, it makes it really easy to compare your absorbs, like which one landed as a crit, which one was a regular, which one's depleted, and it really helps you maximize your globals, refreshing the shields that need it most. And I do spec into Long Rapture. I think that's the way to go, and being able to maximize your absorb values is just critical for discipline. I think if you were any other healer spec, it wouldn't matter what add-on you choose, but for discipline, I really do just think Grid 2 is mandatory. And now that we have Holy Word Life, I think the best way to track that spell, the best way to maximize that spell is just with a color shift. There are a handful of different ways you could do it, and I just think the way the human brain is wired, a color shift to red is just really easy for a person to see and react to. So I set the threshold to 35, color red. So easy to see, so easy to maximize. You don't have to think at all. It's just it either is or it isn't. And that's Grid 2. And this is something I'll link and update as well. And then I wanted to briefly talk about weak auras. I will upload these also. But this one called Dispellable Dots Bleeds Frame Borders, I created that. There's really nothing to it, but I have one line per notable dot. And that's pretty much it. So the system here is if it's a solid line border, for the most part, that means it's a dispel. And if it's a dotted line border, that means it's something to either heal or anticipate healing. So I have a dotted line for all my bleeds. I have a dotted line for dent armors, but I also have this right here called targeted spells. This is a game changer for discipline priests, and I will say off the bat, it's not my weak aura. The author is named Buds. I think it's spelled B-U-D-Z. Incredible weak aura that I've been looking for a while, but I have downloaded it and adapted it to my needs, where I've plugged in all of these spells here. And I've pretty much limited it to medium priority to high priority targeted spells. All of the lower priority ones, I've not included those because it's not as important. I do want to keep my UI minimal. I don't want my screen flashing at me 100% of the time. So these are more just notable medium to high priority spells. And what we're looking at here, let me see if I can just pick one out that applies to this dungeon. So I do have them color coded, and that's just because I'm crazy, but let me look at one here. So Bewitch, that's a cast in this dungeon that you dispel, and there is a lead time on it. There's a cast bar. So what this does is as it's being cast, it puts a dotted line on the person that's being targeted, and after it lands, it turns solid, indicating it's time to dispel. So I have looked for a solution like this in the past, and I came up dry, and I'm so happy I found it, because as a healer and as a disc priest, it is a game changer. What this is helping us with mainly is seeing where targeted casts are going. So a cast bar generally will display on a nameplate, which doesn't really tell you anything if you ask me. It's much more informative if you can see where that cast bar is going. And this weak aura made by Buds does that. So as soon as a cast initiates, it will put a dotted line around the person that's targeted, giving you an opportunity to get ahead of it or be prepared. There's a lot of cases where you might want to shield ahead of a targeted attack, or in a case like Bewitched, there's no reason to shield ahead of it, but it is nice to know where it's going so that you can get ready to dispel and have your playstyle be a little bit less reactionary. And then going into the next add-on, I use bigwigs. I can't share this profile, but I do think as an individual it's important to go through here and kind of just read it all, learn it all. But per boss, there's really only need to track one thing. That's kind of across the board, maybe some exceptions. But I like to go through here and pick through it, and I pretty much disable all notices that splash text on my screen. I don't need to see it. I already know what it is and what it does. Seeing its name on my screen doesn't do anything to help me except just clutter my screen. So I try and turn off all text messages like that, but I'll leave audible cues. And that's kind of just what I know to listen for and how to react to it ahead of time. I don't even like tracking a lot of timers on my screen. It's just not necessary. I try and limit my timers. Let me see, like on this boss, I try and limit the timers down to basically just where I'm going to put my raptures. So every boss is a little bit different, but you don't really need to see every cast in the game, every timer in the game. You just don't need to do that as a healer. The best way you can build your bigwigs is by eliminating about half the items, only leaving items that have to do with what to dodge and what to heal. Just having bigwigs is not pro. A customized bigwigs is pro. Food for thought. And then a lot of people have asked about my action bars. I think like the WoW community is really accustomed to seeing like a weak aura pack that displays like your spells and your cooldowns. I would say that's, how do I say it? Going around the block to cross the street. There's no need to get a weak aura pack to display your spells. This is just an action bar. I do use dominoes, but you can use native action bars are just fine. But this is just action bars that I placed in the middle of my screen, and that's about it. I am going to clip over to the video now. I am going to link everything down below. But there's some food for thought when it comes to building a UI. Less is more. And yeah, here we go. All right, so we're still here. I wanted to add one more thing to this video before we get going. And it's this system right here, a weak aura that I've named cast bars. It's a kind of a mix of everything right now. I need to work on it. It's quite beta, but it brings this red cast bar front and center of my screen. And mainly these are cast bars which fear can interrupt. Every dungeon has a handful of spells that can really break a key if they go off. And a handful of those spells I can interrupt with fear. So I don't really want to be looking for which mob does it, am I targeting that mob, where is he in the field, how am I tracking that cast bar. So what I've done is just loaded in these casts front and center. So if it's something that I need to fear bomb, I get this little tiny audible notice and I see a cast bar front and center, and it really helps you maximize fear. And I think this is a system that once we get going in higher keys, it has the potential to really save a pull. So like in this dungeon, for example, we have hypnosis from the bat. I don't want to have to worry about where the bat is, if I'm targeting him, where is he. That cast bar is just going to come up dead center of my screen, and I'm going to know if it's my turn to fear or if no one else is fearing. And it just makes it a lot easier to maximize fear, takes the work out of it. And why I call this weak aura pack kind of beta is because it's a mix of things, and because I made it, I know what everything does. So like Scream of Pain, for example, in Court of Stars, that's not something I can interrupt, but it's something that can interrupt me. So a cast bar like that, I want to see front and center. I don't want it on a nameplate that's moving around. I kind of just want it big, front and center, so I can see it and not get interrupted. So this is the pack I will try and work on and update it some, but for the most part, this red bar you see on my screen is going to be something that's that I can interrupt. And Court of Stars doesn't have too many examples except for the hypnosis, but that is the last thing I wanted to talk about. Let's clip over to the key. All right, so here we go. We have Court of Stars 18. We're fortified. Right off the top, I want to still plan my PIs. That's always a good use of this time in the front end of a dungeon. And at this point in time in Dragonflight, not everyone has 4-piece, so I think that's really important when planning out your PIs. Go ahead and inspect your group. And if someone has 4-piece, I would kind of default giving them PI. And in this situation, that is our Death Knight. So he has the highest item level. He has 4-piece. No one else has 4-piece. That's kind of just what you want to do. So he has Army of the Dead. That's a really good one to PI. And he also has Empower Rune Weapon. Those are both 2-minute cooldown spells. You do the math. So anyway, we're about to get going here. This was a fairly smooth key. I think we had like 1 or 2 whoopsie doopsies. But it was only an 18, not super difficult. But we have a lot of examples here we can talk about where we see my important cast bar, weak aura. We have a lot of examples of the targeted spells weak aura from buds. And we have quite a few examples of my own weak aura pack with the borders for dispellables. So here we go. Jump on our boat. One thing I haven't mentioned is I've gotten away from native, the native cast bar. It kind of looks cool, but I think that takes away from its efficiency. I think a cast bar that's just straight up a square is the best way to see a cast bar. And for the days where I was experimenting with Twilight Equilibrium, I really wanted a way to help me see if I was casting a shadow or holy spell. So I downloaded Quartz, and I've kind of just stuck with it, even though I'm not using Twilight Equilibrium anymore. I do kind of just like to see a color-coded system. Is my cast bar purple, or is it yellow? And that's definitely just personal choice. I would try and use native if you're not just driven mad by it. But I do use Quartz. It's pretty easy to set up. Put a Mind Soothe on that guy. And I have not watched this one through, but it's a pretty straightforward key, so I'm going to try and just call it as I see it. But in this first group here, we have these sabers that jump around. Oh, they were coming right at me, so I faded. PI's out for the army. I go straight into a Rapture. You can see my absorb values tracked on my bars there. And this is just kind of a cooldown dump. We want to get going. This is the first pull of the dungeon, so Shadow Fiend is out as well. And I will note those cats that jump around. You can walk out of the way of that attack. So in pulls with the cats, if you try and just kind of stay in motion, they won't hit you. We did have 1 death. That's too sad. Too bad. That's sad. I don't know what I'm saying. But it was just a jump from the cat. The Warlock was not moving and it ate him. And you might have noticed, well, let me not get ahead. So there's a throw torch on the tank. That's kind of like a bleed. It's just a dot. That one is not dispellable, so I put a red dotted line just to show I need to heal him. And what you might have seen is there's a purple dotted line going out in the group. That is my forewarning of the suppress cast. And in this key, I don't think we had any dots go off. They were all interrupted. But that purple dotted line is just where the suppress is going. That's a reaction to the cast of it. And you'll see the quelling strike there, middle of my screen in the red with that kind of trumpet noise. It is something you can interrupt. You don't have to interrupt it because it is a small area of effect. But let's say you're in its area of effect. That's a really nice time to fear bomb. And for a group like that, not much is going on even on Fortified. So I think that was just a Schism and a Holy Nova spam. And you'll see with my shades being purple, it's really easy to spot them. Also KUI, it has a really nice feature. It highlights a person red if you have aggro. So we have a big pull here. I fade on the rip. PI, the Empower Rune weapon. I have a Schism out and I'm favoring Holy Nova with the large pull. It looks like I tossed out a Radiance just for some coverage. Refreshing my dots. And I don't remember if any of those suppress really land in this group or not. But not every dot in this game has a forewarning of a cast. But those that do have a cast, it's nice to see where it's going ahead of time. So a Dispel isn't completely reactionary. And I think a couple of those suppresses did land, but the player themselves took care of it somehow. I didn't dispel any of those. And yeah, suppress is something you can interrupt. But I leave that to the rest of the team. I just want to see where it's going, and if it lands, I can come in for the recovery with the dispel. So I think that was our last round of spells before boss. It's always nice to toss a Mind Soothe on the guy on the left there. And any pull with these dogs, or the cats, whatever they are, you don't want to stack with your buddies, like right there, that one's spread. You can dispel it though. Blue, solid border. Oh, we're still stacked. So, Grievous is kind of an annoyance to anyone. I know people really just think Discipline can't handle it. I think it's the same type of annoyance to anyone. And the best way to manage it is keep that debuff shown on your bars. It's really important that you see the stacks so that you can manage it properly. And this is a Fortified pull. I had PI and Death Knight had spells. And it's quite a bit of time before boss. So if we were in Discord, I would have been calling for spells. Oh yeah. So I went ahead and just dropped it on the Warlock. I don't like dropping PI outside of a cooldown window. But I can't stand holding PI for so long. So I went ahead and dropped it there. If you're a 2-minute class, like Empower Rune Weapon, I don't see any reason to hold a 2-minute spell. So that pull itself, if someone wants to count the timer, it was at least 1.5 minutes. And PI is only a 2-minute cooldown. And we still have to walk around and play the mechanics here. So it was a complete loss to not pop a Rune Weapon there. But it's neither here nor there. Going into boss, I think we have Lust. So perhaps someone could argue cooldowns with Lust is worth holding for. It's just one of those things when you're in a pug, you're not able to coordinate like that. But you can Mind Soothe the boss. So all I'm tracking here with Bigwigs is the Arcane Lockdown. For the first round, I Rapture the group. For the Crystalline Reflection, I want to reflect. It's always nice to hit the tank first, because it gives you an opportunity to refresh it. And Arcane Lockdown is dispellable, so I always cast a Dispel on myself. I don't want to jump. And we have Shadow Fiend available. Let's see what I do here. Yep, there he goes. Shadow Fiend and Schism. And I just pump. And the way Smite works for us, it is our most valuable spell. It reduces the cooldown of Penance and Mind Games. So what I'm getting at is I basically never Mind Blast. It's way down the list now in priorities. And same happens to Solus even, which I think is kind of unfair. And I am happy that they're changing that. I think Solus interacts with Harsh Discipline coming up. And I think something else interacts with Harsh Discipline too, but I don't think it's right to get like penalized for using Solus. So I'm glad someone realized that and they're implementing some changes. So there goes the boss. PI is now up. I didn't use it on the boss because I had that that drop before boss. But we will have it going into next pull. And for this guy, he's pretty much on lock back here, so I'm just Schism, pumping as much as I can. And I do spec into long Schism. And with Harsh Discipline and long Schism, you can fit 2 penance procs into 1 Schism. So anytime Schism is out, that's my goal. Fiend for Smite, get 2 penance procs. And you'll see all those suppresses were kicked. So that's really good. I don't have to dispel anything. I wanted to show you the weak aura and show you how useful it is, but this group is just not messing up. So Stair Boss. And being that these little imps here are fortified, gotta be careful. I don't track their cast here, I just kind of know that this is a good pull to Fear Bomb. So any of these pulls with the imps, it is not a bad idea to Fear Bomb. But I open with Schism, Divine Star. Yep, there was the fear. Now that they're dead, I go for my single target mind games. You'll see my Grid 2 turning red for life. And I'm not sure I have any like pro plays with these mistresses. But they do have a really heavy tank slam that's a cast bar that you can get ahead of and probably should get ahead of. There it was, the Shadow Slash. The reason is because behind the slash is a healing reduction debuff. So if you can get ahead of it, that's a little bit better. But they kicked it, so it never even landed. But yeah, in those pulls with the Mistress, the system I have set up is you'll see a purple dotted line for the cast of the attack, and it will turn to a solid border when the debuff lands. And that is just one of those cases where the solid border is not a dispel, that's just marking the debuff. Okay, I think this is where things get out of hand. Pulled a little too much. I go into Rapture, just being super defensive. And you'll see I have that Devastation cast front and center. Again, that's Fell Detonation. That's not something I can interrupt, but I really want to be able to have full visibility of it so I don't peek out from behind a corner too soon. Tank is just eating all of them, even though he has no health. Yeah, see that full purple line? That is not a dispel. That's just the healing reduction. So I think we bit off a little bit more than we could chew there. And no one was playing the pulls. We were just face rolling it. I think the tank ate every Fell Detonation. If you ask me, it doesn't matter if you're tanky or have a large health pool. If it's avoidable, it's worth avoiding. But a lot of tanks and a lot of players just face roll everything. So here we go. Not too much of a loss. Faded to sneak back over. That was a fade mount macro for the win.
5, 4, 3.
PI is on our Warlock. I see that he's in a cooldown window. And also Grip for the win to mitigate the thundering. And we just had Rapture come back up, so I want to cover the group in Rapture. Arguably, I could have played Rapture a little better by delaying it. I would have been able to cover the group and then recover the group. That'd be ideal. But I covered the group for one of those screams. That's good. And you'll see I put that scream center of my screen also. Not interruptible, but it is one of those that can interrupt me. And I want to make sure I can see it clearly. So that was a little bit rough with that big pull. I really tried my best to save it. I think it was just a bad pull though, and we were doomed from the get-go, but I don't think it was a full wipe, and we were able to recover. So we're moving on. Fade Mount. Fear Bomb the Imps. Holy Nova the Imps. Yeah, this pull, it's never a bad idea to play defensive. It can really hurt. So I walled. I have quite a few cooldowns to play. Let's see what I do here. There is my Shadow Fiend and a Schism. PI. Right on the Empower Rune weapon. And for that one, I didn't really want to bother repositioning, so I just shielded and pain set myself. And for a pull like this, any pull that lasts longer than 20 seconds is completely fine for something like Shadow Fiend or PI. The only bottleneck when you don't want to cast PI is if a pull is not going to last 20 seconds. And even though that was a single target fight, we all had spells. It lasted longer than 20 seconds. PI is just fine. And for this mini boss, it is really nice to play Rapture. Let's see how I do it. So you don't want to stack with your friends. The dot damage does spread. And the way I played it is I dispel myself instantly first. And I gave a defensive penance into the second dot. And capped it with a Wheel and Woe shield, Rapture shield. And then the way I played that one, Rapture had ended. I gave another defensive penance to top him off, and capped it with a Wheel and Woe shield. And the way our shields work with this spec is they hit really hard and then they decay. So I'm paying real close attention to the swipe, they call it, of that debuff, the timer of that debuff. And I'm trying to cast my shield as late as possible so it has maximum value.
4, 3, 2.
Oh no, I'm trapped. Yeah, it's one way you can really maximize your shields is by delaying them, because they hit stronger up front and then they decay. You'll see that pink dotted line, that's the warning for Bewitched, but all of them are being kicked. So we don't really have any good examples here. And then the purple dotted line that's going on the tank, that's not for a dot, but that's for the cast from the Mistress. She has a pretty heavy tank slam with that healing debuff left behind, so it's nice to get ahead of it with a shield. And this is probably the easiest guy. You just want to make sure you're not in front of him. But he does have quite a bit of health, so there goes my Shadow Fiend. And I'm giving Schism for my Shadow Fiend. The best thing you can do as a Disc Priest is constantly pump DPS. And one way you can do that is by having very little uptime on Schism. So always run it. And again, per Schism, it's nice if you can have 2 penance procs. Yeah, in a case like that, I just had a 7-stack Wheel and Woe proc. And since I'm spec'd into Crystalline Reflection, I just stood there and ate the attack and kind of returned some of it to the mob. Alright, so we have this boss. Not too big of a problem. Non-tyrannical. Basically 1 cooldown per Infernal Eruption. And you'll see that's the only item I'm tracking with Bigwigs. That's really the only thing that's going to impact when I cast my spells. So I open with a Radiance, drop that Penance for the Wheel and Woe, and for the first one I go into a Rapture. There's my PIQ. And this health debuff here, I'm on the fence. I probably need to remove that Weakar with the pink dotted lines. It's kind of distracting. I don't take Mass Dispel, but you can single dispel it off yourself. Alright, and so for this one, I wait for the ads to spawn, and I even delay it by a second after they spawn. Drop the barrier, full value. For this one, I went ahead and pain supped and walled myself. We have no defensives out in the group, so all I'm doing is flash healing others, letting the binding heals keep me up. And boss down, not a problem. And also with Grid 2, I have it loaded so that center of my bar shows you that plus or minus. Grid 2 has a lot of really nice features if you know how to use it. But there is a... I don't know how to say this. There's an indicator that shows up in the middle of a bar as like an option, and you can put whatever you want there. So I put things like a summon indicator there. I have it loaded to show if someone has a silencer there, and also have it loaded to show if you're a plus or negative there. So with this little RP, it's nice to quickly grab the guys that have the chat boxes above them, and we found them pretty quickly. Lined up a grip for that guy. And here we have the mini boss. We have a couple things we can talk about here. But off the bat, this guy takes almost 2 minutes. I think he takes actually a full 2 minutes. So we want to run Rapture at the top of the pole, and we also want to run Shadow Fiend at the top of the pole. We want those to go ahead and start cooling down, if you will. So let's see. It's always nice before you go into a Rapture to cast Penance first. And the cadence of this fight, the first volley is kind of delayed. So I'm opening, getting a Penance proc, drop my PI, and a Wheel and Woe Rapture onto myself first. And there's no reason to refresh shields. The second volley is more than 15 seconds away. But there's my Shadow Fiend, give him a Schism, and I'm just pumping. And you'll notice my Hypnosis Bat is gray. I want him to stand out. I want to see him. I don't want to have to look for him. And you'll notice his cast bar is in red, front and center. I was moving in for Fear, but I noticed someone else interrupted his cast, so I held, and I got that one. And whenever that volley's coming out, although I don't have Rapture, I still have a single shield. And I've really been favoring giving a single shield to myself just making myself a little bit more tanky. And I don't think that's greedy, I just think that's a nice play. You know, like every class has their defensives, and a lot of classes have more defensives than we do. So I use a shield on myself as just a nice way to make sure I live. And this was really sad. So no one got that bat. Take note that if the bat is alive, even though the mini boss isn't, he will still get that cast off, so someone has to take care of it. And my fear was not available, so no one helped me out. Real sad. And also I would say, like this furry Katie Druid who's rezzing me, never res someone from behind, res them in front. So I think it would have been better if he res me at the door, but that's just being really picky. Alright, so we have all of our spells. We're pretty much only tracking the Maelstrom here, and it's going to be one spell per round. First round is Rapture, so I do go ahead and drop Schism. I don't need it for the healing, I'm just getting it out for the DPS. There were 2 Penance procs. And I dropped the Wheel and Woe on myself. And in these interims, in these windows of DPS, in those windows of damage going out to the party, if it's a round of Rapture, move the tank far down your priority list. Prioritize yourself and the DPS. The tank's health pool and defensives are enough to live. He does not need your shield like everyone else does. So for that one was a barrier. I think I banked a Penance proc going into it, so I dropped Schism and a Penance proc. And for this next one, it's usually best to wall and paints up separately. Yeah, so for this one I paints up myself, and then I just binding heals everyone in the party. The darkness helped as well. But I'm noticing in Dragonflight so far, I'm using paints up more often as a personal defensive. So for this one, there goes Shadow Fiend, Schism, Mind Games, Penance proc. And yeah, for the last one I had a paints up on myself. For that one was a wall. And if we had another one, Rapture is available. But I think we kill boss before, and we do. So that was a pretty clean Court of Stars 18. I'm really eager to get into higher level keys, but I've actually been a little bit uninspired by WoW lately. I'm going to try and get back into it. I really wish I had a group. It makes me really sad, actually, how the community responds to Disc Priests. It's an unfortunate part of the human experience, you know, the mob mentality and just wanting to marginalize and hate whole groups of people for nothing. It's just really sad. You wouldn't believe the type messages I get for playing Disc. It's really disheartening and discouraging, but I do like it, and I'm going to try and keep playing. I'm looking forward to the changes upcoming. And if you glance at the meters real quick, avoidable damage is excellent. You know, it's always nice to be low on the list. My DPS output is at 15.1, which is stellar. And I think I splash my DPS profiles up in a second, but I always look at how much damage I reflect with Crystalline Reflection, and I like to look at how much damage I take off the top with Aegis. And then, oh yeah, so I made a suggestion to this Druid, and he responded well to it. So if you'll notice throughout that dungeon, he was just tossing out innervates randomly. And I said that to him. He said, oh yeah, they were totally random. But I mean, if anyone knows me, I don't think a random spellcast is ever maximizing it. And just how I track his Incarn, or just how I track Empower a rune weapon for Death Knights. There is a best time to innervate per healer spec. And I don't know other specs as well, but for Disc Priests, if you can innervate on top of a Rapture, that is objectively the best time to do it. And this guy was just tossing them out randomly. I think it's a concept that a lot of Druids don't think about, and I offer that suggestion to some, and I think they take to it well. But there's a best time to use it. If you can get a Druid to cancel out the cost of your Rapture, it is a game changer for the group. I know Feral Druids have Innervate now, and it's kind of tricky for them because they have to shift out of Cat, cast it, and then shift back into Cat, so it's not like super friendly, but if they can cancel out some, it's super, super helpful. But I really appreciate everyone's warm and welcoming response to my last video. I hadn't made one in a while, and it was super cool to see a lot of names I knew making comments and a lot of new names tuning into my channel and seeing what Disc is all about. I will always vote playing the spec you want. This whole conversation of what's meta, I think is just a cop-out for easy content. I think the differences between specs is minuscule at best. I think these videos making tier lists are highly, highly subjective. I think it's just simply people's opinions, and I think those type videos only serve to divide our community and promote prejudice and hate within. I've had so many people, I mean, I keep on saying this, but so many people bash me for the spec I play that I've thought about making it into a video on my channel, just showing like some of the backlash I get for just simply liking playing Discipline. But I didn't think it'd be worth giving those type people any of my energy or my time. I didn't want to clutter my channel with hatred. But yeah, I think it's very important to play what you like. I think Discipline is in a great place right now. I think just like any spec, you have to know how to maximize it. And I think maybe the one argument against Discipline is it's harder to know how to maximize. But that is what my channel is all about. So thank you for tuning in, and until next time, Disc out.